For this discussion, I have selected the article The Effects of Reward and Punishment on Reaction Times in Autonomic Activity in Hyperactive and Normal Children by Philip Firestone and Virginia Douglas, 1975. In order to give an overview of ADHD, I've put together a few facts about hyperactivity to provide a richer background for a critical analysis of Firestone and Douglas's study. The most important of these that I found is that it is the most commonly diagnosed illness in childhood. I think this reveals the relevance of Firestone and Douglas's study into contingency management of hyperactive children and illustrates why I found it to be the most important article of the three that I did, exploring punishment and reward as a strategy for managing behaviour in children. Just in relating it to another article that I did, Humphrey and Lee's article, Risk-Taking and Sensitivity to Punishment in Children with ADHD, ODD, ODHD plus ODD, was more measuring risk-taking and sensitivity to punishment itself, whereas Firestone and Douglas was comparing punishment and reward to reveal the most effective condition for changing behaviour of hyperactive children. And I think that this better related to the body of previous literature that was revealing that positive reinforcement was actually appropriate for responses and was reducing inappropriate behaviour in hyperactive children. However, this study fills the literature gap regarding the effectiveness of disapproval in managing the behaviour of ADHD children. However, just in terms of the theoretical framework in which the literature review occurred, I found that the paper did not explicitly express which concepts were an independent variable and which were dependent variables, and I think this would have improved the theoretical framework of the research. For instance, I could have said that the independent variable was hyperactivity and the dependent variable was behaviour, for instance. Next is the aims. So the aims in this, the researchers aimed to determine whether reward, punishment, or a combination of the two were most effective in changing the behaviour of hyperactive children, and additionally they wanted to investigate whether there were differences into the effectiveness of these measures in treating hyperactive children versus a control group of children. Both of these aims were quite clearly stated, and they logically followed from the background material. These are quite different to the aims that I found in Mulvey and Merbert's research on parental corporate punishment, predicting behavioural problems in early childhood, where they were focusing more on child temperament and parenting styles, and these contextually ignored for focus more on the reinforcement conditions, which I thought related more closely to the line of inquiry, is punishment an effective behaviour modification strategy for children. However, and just on top of that, the aims were testable. Quickly, what is contingency management? It's where behaviours are rewarded or punished in relation to appropriate performance. And this particular paper was stating that there's been much research into the effectiveness of token economies, revealing that that these actually increase the desired behaviours. And importantly, the paper raised the issue that there needs to be clarification in the use of rewards, and that there are critical issues dealing with partial schedule. So it's brought this up, but I feel that it wasn't followed throughout the rest of the research. Next is the method. So the sample group was divided into three, and it used a delayed reaction time task. So basically what happened was the group was placed under three different conditions: a reward condition, the second was a condition where it was under a punishment condition, the third was under a reward plus punishment condition. Under the reward condition, subjects were asked to respond to as fast as possible to the instructions of the examiner to press the light. They were encouraged whenever to overreach the baseline of the mean response time. So there was no feedback for this group for a lower mean response. Under the punishment condition, however, this obviously changed. The subjects were required to perform at a level but were told when they were not performing, and when they were performing too slowly. There were no responses for faster mean reaction time responses. And then there's the third group, which is under the reward punishment condition. Subjects were also required to respond as quickly as possible. However, this group was alternatively punished or rewarded after each trial. These three conditions were consistent for both the experimental hyperactive children and for the control group sample. And these were basically carried out over a series of baseline trials where for the first trial the subjects were not given feedback, and for the first 12 these were considered, and this is what was calculated for the mean reaction times for the hyperactives and for both the controls. I thought the design method flowed quite well from the proposed problem. However, it didn't really relate so much to the literature review in terms of partial schedules, and that was brought up as a problem. And there's no there was no partial schedule that was incorporated into the design. The methodology that was designed. So I thought that this could have been an area that could have been improved. Yes. So next is the findings themselves. So the reaction times in both sample groups were influenced by group subject reinforcement conditions and contextual variables. These were quite different reinforcement conditions. These three different reinforcement conditions successfully improved reaction times for the hyperactive and the control group. However, impulsive responses of hyperactive children significantly increased under the reward condition, a result not found under the other two conditions. Overall, the hyperactives responded more slowly than controls, and responses were more variable than the controls. Hyperactives made more interstimulus responses, and these are generally these are the main findings that were found. I found that these findings were relevant as they answered questions in relation to the hypothesis and the aims. And furthermore, in terms of the findings, the description and inferential statistics were appropriate to the level of management for each of the variables as well. In terms of the conclusion and the discussion that came about, so it was quite interesting what this paper found. The reward, punishment, and a mixture of these two are all equally effective in modifying hyperactive behaviour and children's behaviour, possibly because these provide feedback to both hyperactive and the controlled children. It was significant influence of reward reinforcement to affect impulsive responses and interstimulus responses within the hyperactive group, possibly suggests attentional deficit was something that came up. However, the paper does state there's no significant statistical reinforcement. There's no between reinforcement groups for the control children. However, there does appear to indicate quite a significant statistical difference between reward punishment and reward punishment in being effective for the hyperactive children. There were a couple of limitations that I found with this research, and these were mostly that the short duration of the delayed time trial may have made it more difficult to distinguish differences in sample groups' relative behaviour. The delay interval remains an important determinant in the effectiveness of punishment. Furthermore, it's possible that punishment was just not potent enough, so perhaps nicer comments and harsher criticism could have produced a larger variance in the results between the groups and between the different reinforcement conditions. And so I think that this is an area of the research that I think could be looked into and could possibly lead to further research. But just on the heels of further research, I found that in terms of hyperactivity, impulsivity was something that was raised as something that they did not expect in the hypothesis or the aims. And I think this area of research, whether the extent that the responses were interfering with the performance, and just simply where impulsivity and arousal levels, just in how these two are related, could be an area for further research. And and just how the responses would have changed on perhaps giving their children more difficult uh, and more different tasks. Yes, and that's it.